Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Hudson Institute. I'm Olivia Enos, a senior fellow here, and I'm truly, truly honored to be able to host this program today. I want to give a special thanks to Sean Chung at the end here from Han Voice and also to Liberty in North Korea for co-hosting this event with us today. We're truly grateful to be able to have the opportunity to shine a spotlight on such important issues. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to travel to South Korea, and it just happened to coincide with the UN's public sessions that they were doing ahead of their update to the Commission of Inquiry. The purpose of these open sessions was to highlight the voices of many escapees, particularly those who had recently fled North Korea. Many of them shared on the record, some of them shared off the record, and I wanted to share very briefly one of the stories that touched me deeply from that open session. One recent North Korean refugee anonymously recounted what it was like to be responsible for covering the bodies of a family who perished during the pandemic. The family was sitting at dinner, vestiges of rice were still left in the pot, and they perished sitting at the dinner table. The escapee said he could not even look at the family, look at the children in particular. But he remembered the man as a once able-bodied and strong man who had been diminished to mere skin and bones, and he recounted it with absolute horror. This family was comprised of a mother, a father, a son, and a daughter. That's the same composition as my own family, and had I been born in a different place, that story could have been my own. The death of this family was utterly unnecessary, the result of the Kim regime's draconian COVID-era policies and meager rice rations impossible to nourish the bodies of this North Korean family and no doubt countless others. The thing about the Kim regime is that they are brutal beyond reason, exploiting the North Korean people for the gains of elites and the upper echelon in Pyongyang. Worsening human rights conditions in North Korea are not occurring in a vacuum, as many of us know. In fact, they're occurring amidst Pyongyang's continued efforts to cozy up to both Moscow and Beijing. Many of us have been hearing about how North Korea has been supplying dual-use technology, ballistic missiles, and even manpower in Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. And simultaneously, China and North Korea are tightening their ties not only in threatening the security of the US and of the free world, but also in their violations of human rights, in particular through forced labor. North Korea, Russia, and China share many things in common, but violation of human rights is certainly one of them. It's a common trait among authoritarian actors. They violate not only the rights of their own citizens, but also citizens of other countries. Russia and China, for example, continue to employ North Korean overseas laborers. In fact, they are the worst perpetrators of North Korean forced labor. These overseas workers are all considered forced laborers under US law and international law, and these forced laborers enjoy no freedom of movement. Their passports are often confiscated. They don't even enjoy the full fruits of their labor, having a substantial portion of their wages siphoned off in order to line the private coffers of the Kim regime. Some reports even allege that these profits are used in support of North Korea's nuclear and missile weapons program, although I would argue more research needs to be done to that end. I know that fellow panelists are going to explore so much of this in the rest of our discussion. I'm really looking forward to that. But before we turn to them and to our incredible keynote speaker, Representative Young Kim, who's provided a video message for us today, I wanted to say the following. The last few years have been really tough for the North Korean cause. The North Korean Human Rights Act, which was the seminal legislation that really prioritized North Korean human rights issues, has lapsed. We don't yet have a new North Korean human rights ambassador appointed. The cuts that have been made by this administration to the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, as well as proposed cuts to the grants that have long funded civil society, are hamstringing many of the good work that civil society is doing. And Radio Free Asia's Korean service, which was such an important element of information access efforts led by the United States, went dark in April of this year. These are major setbacks, and they're happening precisely at the same time when we should be defending human rights and pushing back against the Kim regime's gains the most. It lacks strategy to reduce these efforts to advance fundamental freedoms like religious freedom, freedom of speech, and freedom of association, among others, in North Korea. At a time when the regime is posing an immense threat to both security and human rights, the U.S. should be embracing Reaganite policies of peace through strength, not retreating from them. And you cannot have peace through strength without both an enduring commitment to U.S. defense and security, as well as a robust defense of human rights and a robust arsenal of tools to back up those efforts. To that end, I would suggest the following actions. First, the U.S. government should consider issuing an atrocity determination for North Korea, revalidating the UN's determination that crimes against humanity are occurring, but also considering whether other atrocity crimes like genocide are ongoing as well. Second, we have to sustain funding and support for Radio Free Asia, and I'm going to shamelessly plug that in the next month or so, we should have a report out here at Hudson in defense of Radio Free Asia, as well as Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Third, Congress should give serious consideration to reauthorizing the North Korean Human Rights Act. This administration should be swift in its appointment of a new special envoy for North Korean human rights issues. Fifth, reestablish human rights-focused funding for civil society and human rights groups to advance freedom in North Korea. Sixth, make full use of the rebuttable presumption, which makes it impossible for goods produced with North Korean forced labor to enter U.S. markets. And seventh and finally, we have to sanction individuals and entities perpetrating human rights violations in North Korea, including actors in China responsible for forcibly repatriating North Koreans and actors in both Russia and China who are responsible for exploiting North Korean forced laborers abroad. There's so much more that could be done, but I offer those as some ideas that perhaps we in civil society can coalesce around to try and draw more energy and attention to these issues. I'm confident in our resilience of civil society and the boldness of many of the escapees that we will hear, even testimony from today, to call on the U.S. and other governments around the world to prioritize the rights of the North Korean people. It's not only the right thing to do, it's also the most strategic thing to do. So on that note, I am really thrilled to introduce Representative Jong Kim. Representative Kim wanted to be here today, but as we all know, there's a government shutdown and the House is not in session this week. But in lieu of being able to be here in person, Representative Kim has graciously recorded a video for us with a message of support for the North Korean people and the North Korean human rights cause. I would be remiss if I did not note that Representative Jong Kim is truly one in a million. Her legacy of going from a congressional staffer working for Ed Royce in defense of freedom and human rights in the Indo-Pacific is relatively unparalleled, but going from a staffer to becoming a congresswoman herself, I think is truly admirable. And what's even more incredible is that she was able to make the transition from staffer to member of Congress without sacrificing her values and commitment to defending freedom and human rights throughout the Indo-Pacific, but in particular, her continued passion and commitment to the North Korean human rights cause. So without further ado, I think my teammate Ray is going to cue up the video so we can hear from her.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Jong Kim, Chairwoman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific. I want to thank the Hudson Institute, Liberty in North Korea, and Han Voice for including me in this critical conversation on human rights in North Korea. As co-chair of the Congressional Study Group on Korea, and as chair of the East Asia and the Pacific Subcommittee, defending human rights in North Korea remains a central focus of my work in Congress. And as a Korean American who grew up just an hour's drive from the 38th parallel in the aftermath of the Korean War, this issue is very personal to me. I'm deeply troubled that the state of human rights in North Korea remains as dire as ever. The DPRK continues to deprive its people of food and faith to maintain control, while its officials commit crimes against humanity with impunity. We also know that innocent civilians endure starvation, forced labor, torture, sexual violence, and executions under Kim Jong Un's regime. Further, North Korea continues to hold South Korean and Japanese civilians hostage while working with China to forcibly repatriate those who escaped the regime. These long-standing human rights violations are compounded by the fact that we are dealing with a more dangerous and emboldened North Korea. Since 2022, Kim Jong Un has been fueling Putin's war against Ukraine, not just with munitions, but also with North Korean troops. Last month, we saw Kim Jong Un walking alongside Xi Jinping, Putin, and other dictators during China's massive military parade. Kim Jong Un is more emboldened than ever by Russia, China, and other adversaries. And as the leader of the free world, the United States must stand in lockstep with our allies to advance freedom and fundamental human rights for all people. That's why I'm proud to lead the bipartisan North Korean Human Rights Reauthorization Act, reaffirming America's decades-long commitment to this struggle. This bill made it into the House Foreign Affairs Committee's State Department reauthorization bill. And in the coming weeks, I will be reintroducing it as a standalone legislation that strengthens support for divided Korean American families, demands accountability for the regime's abuses, and expands access to outside information to help break through Pyongyang's walls of isolation. Like you, I share a hope and vision for a future North Korea that is free from an oppressive regime and for lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. As we embark towards this goal, we must ensure human rights remains a top priority. Now is not the time to push for premature declarations of an end to the Korean War without regime accountability. History shows that an appeasement has never worked, but has only advanced North Korea's nuclear ambitions and permitted its ongoing human rights abuses. So I'll continue to stand with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in this fight and to be a voice for North Korean escapees and people. Thank you for all your tireless advocacy, and together we can help ensure that one day the people of North Korea can live in freedom and dignity. Thank you.
Well, I think it's wonderful to hear that message of support from Representative Young Kim, and she really has been an incredible advocate for the North Korean human rights cause. Now we're going to turn to our panel discussion, where we have a number of wonderful speakers lined up for today's event to shed light on the North Korean human rights cause. First up, we're going to hear from Greg Scarlatti, who is currently the president and CEO of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. Previously, he was executive director of HRNK for 13 years, where he has directed, supervised, or authored 60 publications. That's a lot, Greg.
Thank you, Olivia.
For 13 years, he's been a visiting professor at Hankook University of Foreign Studies and Yonsei University. Scarlatti is also president of the International Council of Korean Studies. He was a Radio Free Asia Korean columnist for 21 and a half years. I actually didn't realize this until I read the bio today, and I've known you a while. And previously, he served at Korea Economic Institute and worked in international development as well prior to that. He holds a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School, Tufts University, and a Master of Arts and Bachelor of Arts from Seoul National University's Department of International Relations. He was born and raised in communist Romania and actually is staying later for our other Hudson event featuring the Romanian foreign minister, I think it is.
With my entire crew. They're all staying. Yes.
And he's a naturalized U.S. citizen. He is truly fluent in Korean, French, and Romanian. I think I've seen you actually translate before. But Greg, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then I will introduce each speaker before they speak.
Olivia, thank you very much. Wonderful panelists indeed. I'm also here, so yeah. No, Radio Free Asia, yeah, that was a very big deal to me, honestly. You mentioned it. For 21 and a half years, I was working in international development, Tanzania, Zambia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil. I never missed one single week. I got cut off this March. That's how it was. But again, I'm not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about making America prosperous, strong, and safe. And how does North Korean human rights play into this picture? Okay, let's go to the prosperity part first. Germany, the world's third largest economy, right? Japan, the world's fourth largest economy. South Korea, 10th, 11th, 12th, right? They're all major business partners, trading partners. Japan has pledged to invest $550 billion into the USA. South Korea has pledged $350 billion. They're creating good American jobs here through their investment. What's North Korea doing? North Korea is threatening both South Korea and Japan through its ballistic missile, nuclear developments, through the development of other tools of death. What about Germany? Well, Olivia mentioned it. There are tens of thousands of North Korean special forces deployed to the Ukrainian front. They're members of the 11th Armed Corps of the Korean People's Army. This is not cannon fodder. They're very good troops, trained in sabotage, operations behind enemy lines, small arms, all compatible with the Russians, by the way, jump trained. Is there anything they don't know? Yes. Combined operations, drones, artillery, infantry. They're learning very fast, and they're learning it on the Ukrainian front. What's the only thing standing between Germany and the Ukrainian front? The Polish military. That's it. So a lot of our partners, allies, friends are under threat, and North Korea has a lot to do with this. The Middle East, okay, we're reaching this spectacular, historic deal in the Middle East right now. According to my sources, and Hyun-sung, you know that my sources are very good. They come from North Korea. 1/3 of the weapons in the hands of Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen come from North Korea. Very simple story. Iranian money, North Korean weapons. So, we used to think of North Korea as a threat to the peace and security of the Korean Peninsula. We used to think of North Korea as a threat to the peace and security of Northeast Asia. It's gone way beyond that. They've been doing this for many years. They ran under the radar. So there are North Korean pilots in Vietnam, the Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War, fighting against Israel, of course. On the Ethiopian side, they had tank crews and tanks in the Ethiopian-Eritrean War. So they have a long history spanning decades, a long history of proliferating instability and violence to the Middle East, to Africa, and now to Europe. We have built a lot of good relationships with members of the European Parliament. They say, no, do not say that the European threat, the North Korean threat has arrived on the doorstep of Europe. It is in Europe right now. That's how close it is. So, what's the connection? For several years we've been talking about the human rights security nexus. What does the Kim regime need in order to develop these weapons? Any thoughts on that? One word. Money, right? Funds. Why are they supplying Russia with troops, ballistic missiles, millions of artillery shells? The first answer is money. Training comes later. So they need money. How do they procure the money they need in order to develop the nuclear weapons, the ballistic missiles, the other tools of death? By oppressing and exploiting their own people at home and abroad. Remember, before COVID, there are about 100,000 North Koreans dispatched to about 40 countries all over the world, primarily in the Russian Far East, in China, and in the Middle East. And this is according to our own U.S. State Department. So there is a clear nexus between human rights and the development of weapons that threaten international peace and security. Okay, the prosperity part. What about the Making America Safe part? Well, they're developing CAN-23 and CAN-24 three-stage ballistic missiles capable of developing a nuclear warhead to this building, right? To the Hudson Institute, sorry about that. So, yeah, you know, that's a very serious threat. And how do they develop these weapons? Again, by means of oppressing and exploiting their own people at home and abroad. You know, the strength part, okay. It's all about making America strong, but again, our allies matter. The South Koreans, the Japanese, the Germans, the European Union, and the others. Somewhere down the line, of course, we will need them. North Korea is slowly, surely, quietly developing these threats against our allies. That must stop. And there's a very clear connection between human rights violations and the threats North Korea poses to regional and international peace and security. I mean, you know this, right? 200,000 people in political prison camps, classifying the population based on the Songbun system, loyalty-based system of social classification. So again, there is, you know, I would hate to sound like a demagogue. That's not my intention, honestly. We are faced with a Korean Peninsula conundrum coming from North Korea that again has become a threat to international peace and security. This comprises egregious human rights violations, crimes against humanity, ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, other tools of death. There is only one resolution to this conundrum, and that is the unification of the Korean Peninsula, as unpopular as that might be these days, under a free, democratic, prosperous, capitalist, free market economy Republic of Korea. Why? When was Germany unified? Anybody remembers? When were the German states unified? 1837, you know, the Zollverein, the customs union, right? So they're together for, you know, a little bit over 100 years, then they were separated, then they were unified again. Koreans shared the same culture, civilization, history, language, and lived under the same political system for 1,000 years prior to the separation of the two Koreas in 1945. Korean unification is not a matter of choice. It is a matter of destiny. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Greg, for kicking us off and also for putting such a fine point on the ways in which, you know, the North Korean regime is posing a severe threat to U.S. security and safety and prosperity in the long run. I think that's really, really helpful to walk us through that in such a clear way. Next, I'm going to turn to Rose Jong. Rose is from a city called Haesan, which is known for its very tasty potatoes. I love the very personal elements of your bios that are really sweet, but also for the fact that it's 5 minutes from the Chinese border. She resettled in South Korea back in 2009, and when she's not busy making custom keychains or exploring Seoul's architecture, you can find her at dance studios as a lover of K-pop. I also love K-pop, and I also danced growing up, so I really love that. Rose graduated from Hongik University's Department of Architecture earlier this year. For her final project, she designed a memorial to honor North Korean human rights and provide comfort to defectors who had to leave their homeland. As an advocacy fellow at Liberty in North Korea, Rose hopes to continue finding her identity and to create more interest in the North Korean human rights issue. So Rose, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, I'm Rose. As a child in North Korea, I loved quiet, warm mornings. At dawn, I wait to the sound of breakfast being made in the kitchen. When my feet grew cold, I burrowed deeper into my grandfather's blanket. A day that began with the smell of a home-cooked meal was nothing special then, just an ordinary morning. I always come back to the memory when I think of home. Growing up, I lived with my grandparents. We worked the fields together, swam in the Yalu River side by side, and grew tomatoes, eggplants, and cucumbers in a small garden. In the summers, my cousins and I played in the mountains and gathered wild strawberries. Every fall, I looked forward to the corn harvest. This was the world I knew, and I was quite happy with it. My mother's work as a broker, helping families separated by the border reunited or at least connect via phone. Her other jobs, selling smuggled CDs containing Korean dramas, eventually led to her arrest. She was released quickly, but was placed under close surveillance. With no other way to support our family, she made the difficult decision to defect. It was choice made easier, she later told me, by the countless Korean dramas she had watched over the years that offered a glimpse into a life outside North Korea. One winter vacation, my mother said, "Let's go on a trip." I could barely contain my excitement. I had rarely ventured far from my hometown, and thought I was finally traveling somewhere new. My grandmother gave me a warm boiled egg and told me to be safe. I didn't know that would be the last time I would ever see her. The journey never stopped. We left in winter and ended up Southeast Asia, where summer never ends. Only then did I realize this trip was an escape, and it was only one way. When we finally arrived in South Korea, I couldn't accept my new reality. I was only a child, but in my heart, I knew I would never see my grandparents again. It felt like a cruel trip, and for a while, I resented my mom. But life carried on, and I found myself adapting to South Korean society pretty quickly. I changed my accent and run things by asking friends. Even at a young age, I instinctively felt the need to fit in. I was proud of myself for not looking or sounding like a North Korean. Then one day, in our elementary school classroom, the topic of the North Korea came up. At that moment, I felt everyone's eyes on me. Although no words were spoken, the silence between me and my classmates felt like a war. As much as I tried to push it away, that feelings continued to follow me. In middle school, while watching a soccer game with friends and cheering for South Korea, someone said, "Shouldn't you be rooting for North Korea?" I felt the color drain from my face. Once again, I felt a gap between me and them. and I wondered if I could ever close the distance. Years later, in university, a professor mistakenly thought my South Korean friend was North Korean. She strongly denied it and took great offense, demanding a formal apology from the professor. Seeing her reaction, I wondered what he said about me. This incident left a deep scar on my heart. As time went on, I realized that I wasn't as well adapted as I thought. I had been living my life avoiding who I was. Whenever the topic of North Korea came up in conversation, I cringed and tried to change the subject. When my family in North Korea would secretly call us, I would hang up the phone after brief greeting, afraid I would burst into tears. I could face how much I missed them, because I didn't want to accept that I may never see them again. Amidst these complex emotions, I began my work on North Korea human rights. I wanted to change how North Koreans were portrayed as pitiful or dangerous. But doing this work scared me at first. If I shared my story, would people look at me again, those silent, disapproving eyes? Then I began to understand something important. Those fears came from my own hidden prejudice. If I believed that North Koreans would only be seen a certain way, didn't that also mean it was how I saw them? Confronting the deepest part of myself allowed me to finally embrace who I was. I stopped hiding and began to explore the thoughts and feelings I had suppressed for so long. In 2022, I took part in Liberty in North Korea's Co-Creators Program. It's a unique opportunity for North and South Korean students to work together on advocacy project. Our team's project was called North Korea Travel. We highlighted different regions of the country and shared facts about their life there, leading naturally into conversation about human rights. As I worked on this project, it occurred to me how much I actually didn't know my own country. Due to the regime's strict restrictions of movement, I never traveled beyond my hometown until the day I left North Korea for good. When I explained this to participants, they listened attentively and said it was first time learning about it. Their sincerity caught me off guard. I realized that prejudice often does not come from malice, but simply from a lack of knowledge and understanding. After that experience, I knew I wanted to continue creating moments of connection and understanding about North Korea. I figured the perfect way to reach people would be through the medium I know best, architecture. For my graduation project, I designed a North Korean Human Rights Memorial Hall. I chose Imjingak near the DMZ as the symbolic location. The space I conceptualized commemorates the sorrow of separation and allows visitors to experience the surveillance, chaos, and oppression North Koreans face in their daily lives. The Pantheon in Rome directs our gaze toward the sky. I turned that idea upside down. In my design, the ceiling collapses into the ground, trapping people beneath, like the crushing weight of the regime's oppression. On the opposite wall, the names of loved ones are carved into the stone, representing those we missed dearly. Before politics, before ideology, these are mothers and fathers, grandparents and children. This is a space where people can freely miss and yearn for the people they left behind. And it's a reminder that North Korea is home our family, friends, and neighbors. Last year, when I visited the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., I felt that it was more than just a commemorative site. It was a space that showcased how to confront humanity's darkest history to ensure that such things are never repeated again. Standing there, I hope that one day, the human rights abuses faced by North Koreans would also be a memory for us to reflect on. I no longer hide my identity. My story began in North Korea, in a beautiful city by the Yalu River. Even now, on a quiet morning, my thoughts drift back to my grandparents' house. I want the world to see North Korea like I do, through the warmth of ordinary days and the humanity of its people. I dream of returning home one day, when all North Koreans can live free and full lives. Until then, I will continue to speak through the language of space and power of stories. The universal of human rights begin with this. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. These aren't just words on paper, but a reality we can create together. Please join me today to advance freedom and human rights for all North Koreans. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rose. I think your story is incredibly moving, and it was very helpful to be able to walk through how you've changed your relationship to your identity as a North Korean and how you've really come into that and realized that. It resonated with me in particular when you talked about the Holocaust Museum and how that is a memory, something that we remember and that we commit to not repeating again. And I share your same hope that one day what's happening in North Korea will be only a memory and instead people can enjoy freedom as well. Thank you. I think that was very, very poignant. Next up, we're going to hear from Hannah Oh. Hannah is from Hwaryong, a city that has frigid winters and hot summers and grows the only white apricots in all of North Korea. Hannah is a fairly recent North Korean refugee. She fled in 2019 and was connected to Liberty in North Korea's rescue network in China. After escaping safely, she resettled in South Korea. She is very active and loves running and rock climbing. Hannah is a fourth-year student at the same school as Rose, Hangik University, studying electrical engineering. While participating in Link's Changemaker Scholarship Program, she worked on developing devices and strategies that increase information access for people inside North Korea. As an advocacy fellow, her goal is to strengthen her leadership in public speaking, to garner more support, and to foster greater collaboration on this issue. So without further ado, Hannah, I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. How many times have you checked your phone today? 50? 100? Every time we look at the screen, we are connected to the world around us and an endless stream of information, news, research, entertainment.
Hannah, it's a little hard to hear you. Do you mind if...
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Here, we can hand you a microphone.
And news, research, entertainment, and even groundbreaking innovation like AI. Now imagine waking up tomorrow in a place without the internet, without access to outsider information, only the news and stories the government permit. A place where people are executed for sharing foreign media, and where families risk their lives just to stay in touch across borders. For 26 million people in North Korea, this is their reality. And 6 years ago, I was one of them. I was born in Pyongyang, a city in the northernmost part of North Korea, near the Tuman River. Winters were brutal, and there were frequent shortages of fuel and electricity. My father was a high school physics teacher. He was quiet, loyal, and diligent. His days started at 7 a.m. in the classroom and went late into the night, even on weekends. Despite his dedication, the monthly rations he received were not enough for our family. So, in order to survive, my mother began selling goods at the market. She wanted a better life for us. And that hope led her to the unthinkable, escaping North Korea. 3 times she was tried. 3 times she was caught. And each time she was imprisoned and sent to a labor camp. The prison camp was a living hell. My mother saw women waste away from hunger and die from simple illnesses. She was one of the lucky ones. Her family brought her food and medicine and act that made her a witness to the suffering of others. I was just 13 when I first visited her carrying a portable rice. In North Korea, it's forced to families to provide for their imprisoned relatives. Seeing my mother stand there like a criminal, her head bowed before the guard, I knew this wasn't right. I should have been in school, but instead I was sneaking food to her, hiding from the stares of strangers. We were being punished. But I didn't understand why. I felt wronged, and in my anger, I blamed her. My mother had made a choice to save her family, but North Korean society saw as a criminal. My father, who had led a quiet life as a teacher, was denied opportunities at work, and our family was labeled as traitors. That was the reality we faced in North Korea. In 2013, on her first attempt, my mother finally escaped and made it to South Korea. She worked tirelessly to send the money back to North Korea to help our family. She also slowly opened the window into another world. Using a small Chinese cell phone, I was able to speak to my mother from time to time. And on our secret calls, she shared with me new South Korean expressions and words she was learning. As she settled into a new society, despite numerous differences, she also recognized the similarities between North and South Korea and its people, and reminded me that despite decades of division, we are still one people. I was determined that one day I would go to the South and experience the full extent of my Korean identity. I secretly began watching South Korean sitcoms. I'll never forget one called High Kick 3. In one episode, there was a story about a man who fell into debt and was being chased by collectors. But what shocked me was that his family wasn't punished for it. But North Korea, if one person sins, the entire family is condemned. But this assured me that in South Korea, life could be different. That even within a family, you were free to make your own choices. This realization changed me and offered a glimpse of the vast world beyond North Korea. Information, even in the form of a sitcom, was hope. And it was worth risking everything for. Meanwhile, I continued to face obstacles in my day-to-day life. I had learned how to code and use software like Photoshop, and I dreamed of going to the university after graduation. But because my mother had defected, I was rejected. So I used my computer skills to find work as a photographer and photo editor. Hoping to advance my career, I volunteered for the Shock Brigade, a group sent to do manual labor at dangerous construction sites. While the others prayed they wouldn't get picked for this kind of work, I went willingly, thinking it could be my way to a promotion. It wasn't. I was sent to the Samjian district, a place known for its harsh winters. For over months, I demolished the buildings in minus 40-degree weather without protective gear. Dust filled my lungs and sweat froze my clothes solid. My only relief was being able to sleep in a crumbling basement. When I returned, expecting the promotion I had been promised, my supervisor simply said, let's wait a little longer. That was the moment I understood my mother. She had risked her life to escape because she was after something more fundamental than a better life. She wanted to live like a human being. In 2019, I made the same choice and escaped. With the help of liberty in North Korea, I made it safely to South Korea and reunited with my mom. But freedom wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. In North Korea, my tech and computer skills had helped me survive. I had always thought that no matter where I go, as long as I have a computer, I'll be fine. But in South Korea, I struggled with something as simple as a new keyboard layout. In school, subjects like social studies felt boring because I had grown up in a completely different education system with distorted versions of history and philosophy. My dream of going to the college suddenly felt impossible. But eventually, I found my place in science. The formulas and equations in math, chemistry, and physics were the constant, unchanging truths I could always count on. I decided to major in electrical engineering. It was rare for North Korea defectors to pursue this field, but I was determined to stay ahead and not fall behind our rapidly changing world. Now, my goal is to become an engineer who can help bridge North and South Korea's science and technology industries when the two countries are one again. More than ever, I see that information isn't just about knowledge and convenience, it's lifeline. Without access to information, you can't see a way forward, let alone build a future. And right now, the people I left behind are more corrupt than ever before. During the pandemic, North Korea closed its borders to an unprecedented extent. Soldiers along the border had shot to kill others for anyone trying to escape. Around 90% of the markets were forced to shut down, leaving families with barely enough to eat. The UN reported that nearly half the population, 12 million people, faced food insecurity, while the WHO rated North Korea's access to medical care as the lowest in the world. A few years ago, when my father became very sick, I was able to send him money for medicine and hospital care. But most North Koreans don't have that chance. Whereas someone on the outside, they are not only corrupt from resources and information, but from hope itself. For many, the future depends on a lifeline from the outside world. Last year marked the 20th anniversary of the North Korean Human Rights Act, but its reauthorization has since been halted, directly impacting the work of many NGOs who are working on this issue and sending critical information and resources into the country. Supporting North Korean people and protecting Human Rights Act cannot be proved. We have an opportunity to be a lifeline for people inside North Korea today, and to remind them that they have not been forgotten. With your support, we can rescue and support more North Korean refugees and get more outside information and technology to people inside the country. And that information can empower North Koreans to not only see a way forward, but to ultimately determine their own future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It was very inspiring to hear your story, but also just thank you for highlighting the importance and significance of information access and for dedicating a lot of your life to being able to promote information access for future generations of North Koreans. I could not agree with you more that the U.S. needs to continue to support that, and ideally South Korea would also. But thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Our final speaker is Sean Chung, and I know I said this at the outset, but this program really would not have happened without Sean and his tenacity, and I think that's true for a lot of the work of North Korean human rights in the present. Sean serves currently as the CEO of Han Voice, an international NGO based in Canada dedicated to improving human rights in North Korea. Han Voice chairs a global coalition comprising over 30 civil society partners representing more than 30 organizations across 100 countries. Sean has successfully led advocacy efforts in Canada to create a historic public policy that allows North Korean refugees to access Canada's private sponsorship of refugees pathway in 2021, which also separately, I'd love to talk to you about that because I know the U.S. used to have similar options too. Sean has organized numerous global and regional summits involving human rights, humanitarian aid, development, and security, communities and governments across the Korean Peninsula. Before his work at Han Voice, he was a consultant at the International Organization for Migration in New York, and he earned his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Toronto. So without further ado, Sean, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Olivia, and thank you to the Hudson Institute for hosting this discussion. I have the privilege, but also unfortunately have to follow three amazing speakers. I think Greg, in our panel, laid out clearly the connection between rights and security, and specifically how the advancement of human rights in North Korea leads to a safer, stronger, and more prosperous America. And then, of course, we heard from Hannah and Rose around, from the perspective of the North Korean people, of North Koreans themselves. I think for I will try to keep it brief remarks. I want to introduce the role of civil society in advancing human rights in North Korea and advancing some of what Hannah talked about with respect to North Koreans accessing information. I want to introduce a civil society, our movement, that believes in a future where North Koreans will be free to shape their own lives under inclusive, responsive, accountable governance. This comes at the heels of a new report this year from the UN, which updates the 2014 Commission of Inquiry report, where in releasing this report, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights described the past 10 years under Kim Jong Un as a lost decade for the North Korean people. And we've seen, through satellite imagery, the increased border restrictions, but also we've heard from activists that have continued to ring the alarm bell, calling this period after the pandemic a new dark ages, an era of deepened control, isolation, and fear. And now with the new strategic partnership between North Korea and Russia, we're likely to see some of that continue. And so when we look at American policy towards North Korea, and with a second Trump administration, we saw in the last Trump administration a completely different approach of two extremes of maximum pressure and then of the summit diplomacy. But I think what we've seen is that diplomacy towards North Korea that focuses narrowly on denuclearization, that focuses narrowly on weapons development, while sidelining human rights simply does not work. And as President Trump said in his 2018 State of the Union address, he recognized that no government has oppressed its own citizens more totally or brutally, leveraging and the advancement of human rights in the first part of his term. I think what we've seen again and again of civil society working to advance human rights in North Korea, of working to increase the free flow of information into North Korea, this strengthens, not weakens, future diplomacy. The flow of outside information and media can erode the North Korean government's propaganda and monopoly on information. making it more difficult for the North Koreans to walk back from negotiated commitments, but also builds confidence and trust between two partners. We've seen, when we look at the broader movement, we look at those who, like HRNK, that continue to document and investigate human rights violations. We see how that can support more effective sanctions enforcement, improve verification processes, offer early warnings of strategic shifts. We look at reports from Citizens Alliance, from HRNK and others that have looked at North Korean forced labor in global supply chains, global business that directly fund weapons development inside the country. And what we've seen, particularly from civil society groups that have, again, in the United States, successfully achieved the passage of the North Korean Human Rights Act in 2004, successfully pushed for the UN to open a commission of inquiry in 2013, and continue to raise the cost of repression inside North Korea. We see that these different activities across the movement lead to a population that hopefully will lead to a population that is better informed, connected, and less afraid, that creates more stability, more predictability, and ultimately a better foundation for peace. We're obviously, I don't want to speak in a vacuum, because we can talk about human rights all we want as a moral imperative, connecting it to rights and security, but we're also facing a landscape where as an unintended consequence of the administration's new policies or foreign aid restructuring, North Korean human rights is, the funding for North Korean human rights activities has become a lot more unpredictable, particularly given that the broader movement relies on funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which I believe is in this building, and also the State Department under the Bureau of Human Rights, Democracy and Labor. What we're seeing, particularly after the stop work order, I think it was January 25th. I remember it because it was a very traumatic time for not just us, for a variety of organizations, organizations that rescue and protect North Korean refugees, document abuses, share information, develop technology that can broaden access to information, were at risk of either scaling back their operations or shutting down altogether. We've obviously seen a reversal in that with many of with the National Endowment for Democracy continuing to receive funding, as well as North Korean human rights projects continuing their projects under TRL. But when we look at this issue, I think what we want to emphasize is that this isn't a moral issue, it's a strategic gap. And this isn't just something that when funding gets cut or funding gets suspended, it's not only a matter of, rebuilding in the future. The groups that are sending information inside the country, but also bringing information out, rely on sustaining a network of informants, a network of those that are able to provide information inside the country. And when those networks are severed, those networks, particularly at a time in which North Korea is facing more isolation, it's very difficult to recover. And the other part of this is that the North Korean government has been wanting this to, in terms of accessing information, in terms of radio broadcasts, the North Korean government has been watching this closely because this has been their goal for a long time, to shut down these radio broadcasts that are providing real-time information to North Koreans inside the country. And they will, of course, see this as an opportunity to continue repression, to really continue the kind of repression that they have inside the country. And so without sustained funding, we risk losing hard-won infrastructure that can't easily be rebuilt. And so there are 3 calls to action. So we've been partnering with many different civil society groups to put 3 calls to action on the table. The first is to protect U.S. funding through the National Endowment for Democracy, but also through the State Department. The second is to reauthorize the North Korean Human Rights Act. And so I think Representative Young Kim talked about in her remarks putting through a House bill, a standalone bill. I think at this moment we need more Republican support. Specifically, we need a Republican member of this Senate Foreign Relations Committee to step up and to co-lead this resolution with Senator Tim Kaine's office. to take up. I also like to remind folks that it was then Senator Rubio that continuously reauthorized the North Korean Human Rights Act and was a leader on this issue. But third, I think it's important that we appoint a new U.S. Special Envoy. I think particularly in the last administration, we saw how important it was with Ambassador Julie Turner to have a voice within and outside the U.S. government that could continue to signal U.S. support on this issue. And so I think when we look at this broader landscape, we understand that the North Korean issue has been around for a while. We've been talking about this for the last 20, 30 years, and we know that we can't bring change overnight. But I think that we can safeguard the movement that keeps this vision alive. The North Korean issue, the North Korean challenge, the different threats that Greg laid out have been here for a long time. And it will continue to be a long-term challenge. And so this necessitates a long-term solution. And so and I know that there are many different ideological views on what a future North Korea looks like, from collapse to engagement and liberalization and so on. But I think what's key is that regardless of where you're at on the ideological spectrum, and in hearing Rose and Hannah's testimony, it's that the conditions that will lead to change, whatever that change may become, is the same, which is that we need a North Korean population that is informed. We need the markets to continue. We need information to spread, and for there to be conditions for change that come about, hopefully, in our lifetime. And so the path forward is long, but we clearly see it as achievable, and we hope that through persistence, partnership, and shared responsibility, that you join us in our advocacy so that we can ensure that the North Korean people are not forgotten, even in this dark moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I think you put a really fine point on our advocacy and our interests long term. And I love how you ended with this idea that it's very achievable, that the asks are possible, and that we have past precedent of success as a community in advocating for change on behalf of the North Korean people. So I really love that. I just wanted to add one additional reflection from my recent travels to Korea. I was there in South Korea on the same day that there were the announcements made, or the suspected announcements that the cuts were going to be made to the DRL grants. And I had literally spent the week prior meeting with almost every single person who is active in civil society in North Korean human rights space. And I can tell you with utmost confidence that they are doing absolutely incredible work, not only providing tangible information access to people, but absolutely irreplaceable work providing on-the-ground information, research from testimonies of North Korean refugees that they have much easier access to in Korea. And almost every single group had told me that if the funding didn't continue in some way, shape, or form, they might not even exist by the end of this year. That would be a huge loss, not only for the North Korean human rights cause, but also for those of us here in Washington and in other capitals around the globe who are trying to craft effective policy that meets the needs of the actual people on the ground in North Korea. And so the continuation of this funding in support of these grants is essential. The continuation of the funding and support for Radio Free Asia, but also for civil society efforts that bring in a broad range of information. I mean, we heard from both Rose and Hannah that access to information, even watching something as simple as a Korean drama, was incredibly influential in their decision to flee. And I think that's a common story amongst many North Korean refugees who say that we heard about the outside world, we realized something was off in our day-to-day life in North Korea, and we believed and hoped, which I think, Hannah, you said that hope was so important and almost intoxicating that you just had to have more of it. And I think that as a freedom-loving society, we need to make sure that other people have continued access to that information and continued access, more importantly, to the hope of freedom and for a brighter future. So taking moderator's prerogative there, but I'm going to ask all of you all one question, which should hopefully give audience members a little bit of time to think through any questions that you may have for them. When we turn it over to audience Q&A, please identify your name and your organization, and please only ask a question. I will cut you off if you go on a diatribe. But all that to say, I wanted to ask each of you just very briefly, if there was one thing that the U.S. government could do today to best advance the North Korean cause, what would it be and why? We'll just go down the line, starting with you, Greg.
Okay, so Sean mentioned the North Korean Human Rights Act. We need to reauthorize it in the United States. Canada, Sean, Canada needs to pass the North Korean Human Rights Act. South Korea needs to implement the North Korean Human Rights Act. How wonderful would it be to have 3 special envoys for North Korean human rights in South Korea, in Canada, and in the USA? Okay, I don't mean to break ranks with the other panelists. My organization got defunded under Biden and Harris, not under Trump, okay? We used to have funding for our satellite imagery analysis project. We got defunded. Each and every proposal we submitted was shut down. Why? Don't ask me. We tried hard. Thank you.
Very helpful perspective. Okay, Rose. Yes. Okay. Sean, if you want to take us.
Well, I can't comment on individual funding situations, but I think it would be, in terms of looking at North Korean human rights funding, we want it to continue, and we understand that, there are a lot of complexities with the way that the department is restructuring, but I think that, this should be a priority, and what has been appropriated, what is in, I think the House had passed their appropriations bill, which had included a North Korea earmark. And again, I think when people talk about this, it's as if we're looking for $100 million. I think it's annually it's $5 million from DRL, $5 million from the National Endowment for Democracy, and so protecting that funding and protecting civil society that's working on this, I think would be the call to action from us.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add here on funding side of things. I also work on China human rights issues, and I know for us, one of the things that our community has been thinking through is that likely these grants are not going to continue through the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. They're going to occur in a different way. So looking creatively for other areas in the U.S. government, I think there's a CPIF fund that is specifically China-focused, where some of this could be redistributed and directed so that there's at least still future funding available. I think something similar is worth looking at for North Korea, because there may be some even more security-focused funding where you could have add-ons for North Korean human rights. And ideally, it would even be expanded, because there would be a recognition of the points that Greg has made, of the points that Sean has made, that Rose and Hannah have made, that it's not only the strategic, it's not just the morally right thing to do, it's also the strategic thing to do, and it advances U.S. interests to continue with that. Hannah and Rose, do you guys want to add in? Rose, do you want to start?
네. 저희가 오늘날 할 수 있는 일에 가장 시급한 거는 북한 인권법 재인가와 북한 인권 대사 임명이라고 생각합니다. 지금 현재 펀딩들이 다 끊겨서 제가 속해 있는 NGO에 있는 동아리도 활동을 이제 개인 돈으로 소그룹으로밖에 못하는 그런 상황이고, 제가 너무 피부에 와닿게 그거를 느끼고 있는 상황이기 때문에 이런 부분에서 먼저 돼야지 결국에는 이런 NGO들이 활동을 하고, 그리고 북한에도 정보 유입이 더 잘 되고, 그것이 이제 나중에 조금 롱텀이더라도 북한을 가장 빨리 변화할 수 있는 방법이라고 생각을 합니다. 네.
So what the U.S. government can do, what is the most urgent thing, is the reauthorization of the North Korean Human Rights Act and appointing the special envoy. And even for, in terms of the funding, the NGO that I'm actually part of in South Korea, their funding has also been cut. And we are actually using our own money to actually do activism work in South Korea. So it's something that I feel it in my heart already. So this would allow NGOs to continue their activism and also to send in more information and resources into the country. And in the long term, this will bring the changes in the most rapid way.
And Hannah?
로즈가 이제 했던 것처럼 저희가 지금 가장 시급한 거는 북한 인권법 대사, 그러니까 인권 대사를 임명을 하고 그분이 이제 일을 하셔서 저희 인권법도 재인가를 할 수 있게 이제 힘써주는 게 지금 가장 이제 시급한 문제라고 저도 같이 생각하고요. 그리고 저희가 이제 저희의 궁극적인 목표가 이제 북한에 더 많은 정보를 보내서 그들의 어떤 인식 변화와 저처럼 이제 저는 뭐 한국의 어떤 시트콤 하나의 변화가 있었던 것처럼 또 다른 누군가는 뭐 라디오를 듣거나 또는 뭐 한국의 어떤 뉴스를 보거나 이런 것들을 접하면서 생각의 변화가 있을 거라고 믿고 있고 그렇게 변하고 있으니까 이제 더 많은 정보를 보내야 된다고 생각합니다. 그러기 위해서는 이제 펀딩도 가장 중요하고 또 이거를 이제 책임지고 계속 이제 뒷받쳐 주실 분이 필요하다고 생각합니다.
I think, as Rose mentioned, reauthorization is important, and also appointing the special envoy, somebody who would symbolize and represent this bill, will be really crucial. For me, I mentioned that in North Korea, just through a sitcom, I was able to access outside information, and sending in more diverse types of information into the country is important. That is the ultimate goal, so that people's awareness and recognition of the outside world will change. For me, it was a sitcom. For somebody else, it could be a piece of information they heard from a radio or a news broadcast, and this will allow more people to change the way they think. So allowing the funding and appointing a special envoy to continue to represent this act will be important.
Also, thank you, Chris, from Liberty in North Korea, for providing some translation help for us. Okay, I'm going to open it up to audience members. I see there's already a question. We'll go to Kenji here, and let's just wait for the microphone.
Global Peace Foundation, Kenji Sawai. Regarding North Korean Human Rights Act, actually, that is bipartisan work. So really, congressmen really working hard, but the problem is priority is still low. That's very problem. So then for reach to the other many congressmen, how we can information or some strategy to many congressmen in United States. How do you think some good method to reach?
Thank you, Kenji. And Chris, maybe I'll go over to you to translate so that everybody has good time to think about it. For the whole panelists, yeah. And I'll just kick off the answer a little bit here. You know, I've been surprised actually as I've gone to Capitol Hill in particular that, especially on the China human rights stuff, a lot of folks have said that they actually weren't hearing from the communities that were affected that much. And I know that there are a lot of different interests at stake. I know that some people are concerned or fearful of jeopardizing funding that they already have or future funding opportunities. But I think if there are private ways to inform people that there are concerns about like lack of funding and that the concern isn't just about lack of funding or the suspension of Radio Free Asia. The real concern at the end of the day is that the people who we are trying to advance their cause is going to be put kind of on the back burner. And so I think highlighting the very real people who are affected by U.S. policy decision-making, South Korean policy decision-making, and of course, ultimately by the brutality of the Kim regime. I think that we just have a responsibility to continue to remind people of this. And I think, Greg, you really hit the nail on the head, being able to highlight the many different ways in which the global conflicts that are top of mind that maybe members of Congress are already thinking about are directly affected by the Kim regime and their human rights violations. I think that type of messaging could really resonate. So, but I'm sorry, I took moderator's prerogative here if other folks would like to answer. Yeah.
Oh, sure. It's, thank you, Olivia and Kenji. Again, it's a matter of priorities. As you said, Kenji, we are seeing this amazing deal in the Middle East. Who would have believed this, right? Hamas and Israel apparently, getting closer to some negotiated deal. Russia is in very dire straits on the Ukrainian front right now. So, perhaps if we get these issues out of the way, North Korea will be next. And again, I've never talked to President Trump personally about this issue, but I really think that to him, this is still unfinished business. So I really think that North Korea is going to stay on the agenda, perhaps very soon. Human rights, I've heard this a lot. As you know, I'm the one who brought Chi Song-ho to the State of the Union address. He became a member of the South Korean National Assembly later on. Wasn't human rights weaponized? Well, not really. The result was really good. Chi Song-ho became a member of the South Korean National Assembly and a symbol of the North Korean human rights movement. So I think that there's a very strong North Korean human rights element that's still there within the thinking of the administration. Kenji and Olivia, we need to do a much better job as civil society organizations to highlight the issue for members of Congress to make sure that we reauthorize the North Korean Human Rights Act. Honestly, it's our responsibility as well. Although resources are limited, time is limited.
And we need Congress to be forward-leaning as well.
We do.
I always think of Congress as like they have been long-standingly the consistent actor to advance human rights issues, whether it's North Korea, China, or something else. So we really need them to stand up. And that's, I think, why we're so grateful for Representative Kim for her outspokenness. Sean, I saw that you wanted to weigh in here.
Actually, speaking of, the fellows and I are heading to the Senate building for a Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff briefing. I think the issue, and so there are two ways that I can answer this. I think one is that this continues to be a bipartisan bill. We've met with many, senator offices on both the majority and minority side, and there is no controversy in saying that each member supports human rights in North Korea. I think the difficulty that we're finding is in finding a Republican champion after then Senator Marco Rubio became Secretary of State. And so I don't think we've found I think Senator Kane's office continues to lead on the minority front, but on the majority front, I think we need to have a strong Republican champion that will take up the mantle after Secretary Rubio. I think the other part of this is that this is where I think not just civil society, but ordinary people can make a difference. I mean, Link and Homeboys have partnered on a grassroots campaign where we've gotten Link supporters to write in letters and to call their members of Congress. And I think we've had, hundreds of letters sent to different offices, different representatives and senators. And I think that continues to be important because we've also heard that, folks on the House Foreign Affairs Committee or the Senate Foreign Relations Committee are just simply not hearing about North Korea, even from those with large Korean American constituencies. And so I think, yes, civil society continues to have a role and will be on the front lines in pushing this. I also think that ordinary folks, participating in the great, the great American experiment of democracy should call up their members of Congress and write letters to their representatives.
Rose and Hannah, did you want to add anything, or it's good? Okay. Other questions from the audience? I think we have time for maybe one more. Yes. Here, wait 1 second. She's going to bring you a mic.
Thank you. My name is Terzi Hartova, and I'm from the Czech Embassy of the Czech Republic here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. And obviously, I'm here representing Czech government. And my question to you would be, is there any request, if you could make, to foreign governments, especially those who have a diplomatic representation in North Korea, such as my country? What would be the request? And maybe a bigger question to think about. There was this mentioning of the ideological considerations, how to handle this situation. Do you think engaging with the regime would be a way to go, or is it undermining it by supporting human rights? What's in your opinion the way to go? The United States doesn't have a diplomatic representation. Is that, in your opinion, the correct way to go? And I would recall the case of Otto Warmbier, which I think is also something that kind of could lead a discussion. Like, is it good for to have some kind of engagement, to have people traveling to North Korea, and also the question of sanctions? Is that the way to go? Is it something that undermines the regime, or is it something that is punishing the people because it will contribute even more to closing the country up and actually prevent the flow of information and the access to information that has been mentioned? Thank you.
Chris, would you like to interpret that?
It's a lot of questions.
I'll start. I don't think I can answer all of your questions in one sitting, because I think we could probably spend the rest of the day debating and discussing all of those very important insights. To me, the most important thing that any government can do is to shift the balance of power away from the North Korean government and towards the North Korean people. And to me, that's why access to information is so critical and important, because it gives agency to the North Korean people to be able to make a decision about what they do with that information about the outside world. So once they have that information, most North Koreans will say, you know, we've known people who have decided to stay and who have tried to facilitate change from within. We also know people who have decided to escape and to leave and to try to facilitate change from without. Obviously, on this panel stage, we have very brave people. And actually, my intern also is a North Korean refugee. And my intern prior was also a North Korean refugee. And so many of them have made the brave decision to escape, which they put their life on the line for. But I think creating an environment in which the North Korean people have the ability to shape the future of their country in a way that bends toward freedom is the ideal. And without the tools at our disposal to be able to promote that information access, I think there's a real danger of the situation receding even further. That's how I would answer that question, but I think there are others who would probably expand on that or maybe add. Yeah.
Sure. So has the Czech Republic redeployed diplomats to North Korea? The Poles have. I spoke with them a few weeks ago.
I would say after the pandemic, there has been some return.
All right.
I'm not sure if the exact same level as before the pandemic.
All right. So.
The embassy is there.
Okay, sounds good. So EU countries, the Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, Sweden, Germany, outside of the EU, the UK, and Switzerland, correct? Right. So I think that the main point here would be access. You know, we hear a lot of stories about North Korea under COVID and the North Korean human security situation being impacted by UN sanctions and US sanctions. There's only one way to find out: access on the ground, having the capability to conduct assessments on the ground. And I think this is a point that EU member states could make together with Switzerland and together with the UK, most definitely, on tourism and exchanges, as my good friend Hyun Sung and other North Korean escapees will confirm. If you are a US national in North Korea, whether you're a tourist, an NGO operator, whatever you are, they will 100% assume that you're a US spy. It's very, very dangerous for US citizens to go to North Korea. EU citizens, maybe not so much so, I don't know. But nevertheless, we need to stay in sync and coordinate on this policy. So if the US cannot allow travel to North Korea, perhaps the US, should stay in, close coordination with our EU partners, friends, and allies. And, at some stage, of course, we need to resume travel, but it has to be based on assuring and safeguarding the personal security of foreign travelers going to North Korea. Like many of you in this room, I happen to know the parents of Otto Warmbier very well, Cindy and Fred. What a tragedy. And they told me one thing, Cindy told me one thing. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have told him not to go. Now I know, and I would like to tell other Americans and other young people, don't go. It's as simple as that. They had him killed.
Sean or Rose or Hannah, did anybody want to add anything?
I think perhaps Hannah can go first.
제가 생각하는 거는 이제 북한과 외교 관계를 더 할 것인지 아니면 이제 인권 문제에 더 관심을 줄 것인지 이제 질문을 하셨는데 저는 인권에 관심을 더 둬야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 이제 그 북한은 오랜 시간 동안 정부와의 뭐 외교 관계나 이런 것들을 지속해서 뭐 있었지만 다른 변화는 일어나지 않았고 그 안에 있는 사람들은 여전히 똑같은 고통을 몇십 년 동안 이제 유지되고 있고 계속 변화가 없기 때문에 그래서 지금은 인권에 더 관심을 가져야 된다고 생각합니다.
So in my personal opinion, I think we have to focus more on the human rights aspect because I know many countries have had diplomatic relationship with North Korea, but nothing has really changed over the past few decades, and people are still suffering tremendously inside the country. So I think at this juncture in time, I think it is time to focus on the human rights aspect.
그리고 이제 다른 사람들이 이제 외국인들이 북한에 여행을 가는 것이 정보 유입이 더 안 좋게 만들 수 있냐라고 질문을 하셨는데 이제 여행과 그런 정보 유입은 좀 다른 문제라고 생각을 하고 이제 외국인들이 북한에 여행을 갈 수 있는 거는 정부에서 이제 관리를 하기 때문에 입국이나 어떤 문제는